Good day, grade 11 parents and pupils. My name is Bryce Dekker. For those of you who haven't met, I provided the report for your son to consider, what to do post grade 12. It's a privilege for me to have a small role to play in the considerations for what to do post your high school experience. Today, what I've done is I prepared a bit of a presentation to take you through that report in quite a granular way and give you the thinking and the intent behind each piece of information provided. So the report is essentially divided in kind of four big components. We had a look at your personality preferences as a starting point. We had a look at your career interests and strengths, and all of those kind of formed your individual diagnostics that we use as a big key input into the career and tertiary suggestions that conclude the 5-page report that was handed out to you. So first of all, if I kind of take you through, the personality preferences and how to read certainly the kind of first part of the report, you'll see that there's a little graphic on page 2. What I had to look at first was, your son's natural way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And we do that through the interpretation here of 4 kind of key opposites. You'll see on the top left-hand side, it starts with energy style. We looked at his thinking style, his value style, and his lifestyle. And each of these series of 4 opposites have a dichotomy that we interpret. And if starting on the left-hand side, it's got to do with where you recharge your energy and get, kind of recharge your batteries and get your energy from. There's an extroverted and introverted preference. And from the assessment that your son did for us at school, we could give quite a good sense around where there was most clarity there. And in terms of his thinking style, you're either a very concrete thinking preference or you're somebody who's a bit more of a big picture, kind of connect the dots type of thinking preference. In terms of his value style, it's got to do with the kind of his approach to decision making. You're either a bit more head based or you're a bit more heart driven when making decisions. And then in the context of his lifestyle, you either got a preference for being a bit more structured, planned, and organized, or you're somebody who likes to kind of wing it a little bit last minute. .com is quite exciting. As an example, and we gave him a 4-letter code at the end. So if I use this as an example, the individual had 2 personality preferences, or personality types rather. And you can see on the first line, I represented the ENTP, and on the second line, it was ENFP. And what that denotes is really that on his energy style, he had an extroverted preference. In terms of his thinking style, there was an intuitive preference, and we represent that intuitive preference with an N. In terms of his value style, certain instances the report would have 1 personality type, others will have 2. And if it was 2, it was in this case, as an example, that there wasn't much clarity between the thinking and the feeling preference. So therefore, you can see I put it ENTP and ENFP because there wasn't clarity around that dichotomy. And then in terms of his lifestyle, this individual had a perceiving preference. And if you flip over the page, or probably before we do that, if you're interested, go and have a look on Tertiary.com, and bottom right-hand corner of the page, go and punch in your personality type. There's a lot of websites that link personality type to careers, but I think this one's quite, a really good one to look at. It's quite extensive with the literature around careers. So go and have a look there. Tertiary.com, great website to peruse different information around your personality type, with particular reference in this context around personality type and careers. If you look on the next page, page 3, you'll see that I've represented the different combinations of those letters on that page, and I would have just ticked off the 1 or 2 personality preferences that we thought was relevant for your son. As you flip over, as you flip over the page, you can see that I had a look at his career interests next. You'll see in the hexagon, what we looked at here was the Holland's vocational types. There are 6 career interests that are represented here on the hexagon. Starting on the top left-hand side, they're pretty self-explanatory. And what I've done is just tick the top 3 interests that were most prominent from the assessment that your son did at school. If you're interested, you can go into that website that I've listed there at the bottom half of the page, or the bottom half of the little graphic. And you can go and have a look at different combinations. When you punch in the different combinations of letters, you can start to see different careers represented there. What's quite nice with this instrument, it can eliminate options as much as what it can talk to what is coming through from an interest perspective. So use it in both, both ways, both to talk to what careers are kind of featuring from an interest perspective, as well as the careers that perhaps eliminate off the table for you. The next piece of information, and probably the one that I'm most passionate about, is exploring around your son's strengths, and in particular reference here to his character strengths. You'll see that he did an online assessment for me, I think it was around April, May, when it came through to the school. And if you haven't done so already, please, I encourage you just to download his report on gallupstrengthcenter.com. He created his own username and password when doing that assessment, and simply put, just sign in with that username and password. Then there's an opportunity for you to download a full 4 or 5 page narrative of these strengths. And I particularly find the narrative really good. So certainly it might not be an absolutely perfect description of your son's strengths, but it should give us a good clue around his natural wiring. And I suppose the intent of the exercise is to establish what's unique about him. And when we start to consider, long-term options for him, I suppose the biggest kind of parameter we want to use is how best are we playing towards his strengths rather than away from them. So the Strength Finder lists, there's 4 categories of strengths, and I've represented here just his top 5 strengths. So you'll see that I've ticked these top 5 strengths and represented, kind of those, at the bottom of that graphic. So have a read through, particularly the report, and as I said, it's a really cool narrative around what makes him unique. The next part of the report, and probably the most important, I mean, the big nub of this conversation is around what to do kind of post-grade 12. So the next part of the report unpacks some career and tertiary suggestions. And I think first and foremost, you can see that I've given him a couple of careers, and you can see I've probably tried to give him about 11 or so choices here. It is, I think, a lot of the literature that's coming out with careers at the moment is that we might do a couple of careers, in our lives. And I think the idea of kind of fixating on one career, and sometimes I think can be quite limiting. And also the truth of it is, remember, we're only looking at what he's told us and his diagnostics that have come through. And there might be others. I mean, the point is we just want to give him a broad range of options to consider and have fun with around his long-term options. You'll see that, certainly I try to make a conscious effort to look at his subject package that he was taking at school. And I'll explain to you in more detail shortly, but is that what's realistic from a study perspective to pursue with that package, which will obviously lead to a career option kind of later. I mean, I know at Life Orientation, the kids have done some work around, a process to filter down career options. So just I would nudge them to go and look into their Life Orientation curriculum. They've done some magic work there. But this simple methodology on the right-hand side should give us a good clue around how to filter down options. And as I said to you, the big parameter we want to use is to kind of always ask ourselves that question: is the career maybe in the long term going to be swimming more towards my strength as opposed to away from them? So have a look, at that methodology to help filter down the list. But really, I encourage you to have some fun with some of those careers. If I've missed off anything, please drop a mail. We can chat about it. But this really informs, the next part of the exercise, which gave your son some tertiary suggestions. And if we unpack this, I mean, first and foremost, I think before we gave the suggestions, I looked at, I think it was term 2, grade 11 results. But just to give me context, I actually did go back to grade 10 as well and looked at the historical academic performance and, around your son's marks, because that dictates a lot of what's realistic or not from a tertiary perspective. You can see that generally, I did listen to your son. He gave me kind of ideas around careers, and you'd see hopefully if there's a correlation between, from a career perspective, what he told me and what I'm saying. That's a fantastic outcome. But also he did talk to us about some tertiary choices that he might have had in mind at the beginning of the year. I try to listen to him as much as possible. But you've got to understand that obviously at the university there are limits in terms of the amount of degrees that are available and which we're allowed to apply. Also did go overseas. I think in total we did try and give a spread of local and international kind of options, depending on what he had spoken to me about. But really, I just want to encourage you that this is very much a joint decision. If the boys are listening, it's between you and your folks and what's practical and what you can afford. But the suggestion really is to kind of apply for a few places and make sure before you make that final decision, you've got some concrete options on the table. And just to give you a sense of the spread of tertiary options, we kind of counted, we gave about 60 tertiary options with all the Southern St. Andrews College boys. So there was quite an extensive kind of repository of different tertiary choices. And I did try as best as possible to cater for their individual preferences and needs. So have a look at those. I mean, the big kind of point of reference is often it's less about the actual degree. It's more very much about the substance of the actual subjects you're going to be doing practically from first to kind of third or fourth year. If you identify with that journey, well, that's I suppose the biggest parameter we can use to say, listen, am I excited about the package of subjects I'm going to be doing at varsity? So fixate sometimes less about what the degree is called. I would probably be putting my attention in the content of the degree. If you go into the next kind of, that concluded the report, but I just want to kind of talk us through, certainly some of the work that I had done in the background when considering what tertiary choices to give your son. I did go on the premise that he's got probably a good understanding of how his marks look, number one, and also how the different universities work in terms of the entrance criteria. But just to summarize, I mean, I think there's three big kind of criteria that we use, when deciding upon tertiary choice. I mean, the first thing is the subject selection, and I'll talk you through what that kind of means now for him in the long term. But you probably would have got a good overview around this when he chose his subjects in grade 9. And a big thing is for wherever we're going to go is to make sure we look at quite critically his grade 11 and 12 results. So I had, particularly for a South African context, we looked at grade 11. For overseas kind of tertiary choices, we looked at grade 12 results. And then the third kind of key criteria is this idea of, various different benchmarking test results. In South Africa, we do the NBTs. In South Africa, in the US, you do things like the SATs. And I'll kind of talk you through a little bit of a high-level overview of these two kind of benchmarking tests that are commonly used. So let's first of all unpack subject selection. And again, as I said, you probably have done a little bit of this in grade 9, but just to summarize, math, science are big kind of determinants of what we can or can't do at a tertiary level. Now, if you want to pursue something in medicine, it is going to be quite difficult to pursue that if you don't have, for example, your maths and your science. If you want to be an engineer and you don't have maths and science, it's very difficult. And then obviously to pursue a science degree without those kind of subjects, then it's very difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible. You can always kind of catch up that subject after school, but it's going to be quite a difficult journey. For things with core maths, if you've got core maths, then it opens the door to a lot of the commerce types of degrees. There's certain humanities options. For example, the PPE is quite a common degree, quite a popular one. But unless you've got core maths, you won't be able to take the economics. And then there's quite a popular degree at UCT called BSc Property Studies. Unless you've got core maths, they won't necessarily require you to have the science, but core maths is a big requirement there. If you do move to math literacy, it's not the end of the world. I mean, there's some fantastic options. Remember, with math literacy, it's not to say that you don't have options at a tertiary level and at a traditional tertiary level. If you want to pursue things like law, things like teaching, psychology, or sit within humanities, and in that way, they're going to see math literacy and math core in exactly the same way. If you have a look at the next part of it was grade 11 and 12 results, and we really looked at this in quite a lot of detail. But you can see that a lot of the varsities, I mean, they all work in different ways, but a lot of them in South Africa in particular work on what they call an admission point score. And really, it's just a scale that they use. And you can see it on the left-hand side. It's pretty intuitive. For example, you get 60 to 69, you get 5 points. 50 to 59 would be 4. 70 to 79 is 6. And then anything 80 plus 7 points. Now, you take that scale, you look at your 6 subjects, and generally speaking, just as a general rule of thumb, if you're hovering around the 30-point range or a 60% average, generally, particularly in the South African context, you've always got choices. And when I say just South Africa, I mean a tertiary choice overseas, there will always be options. Remember, the point is that even if you don't meet the initial entrance criteria, there's a lot of foundation type programs where you can bridge into the course of your choice. So there will always be options, but primarily in the end of your grade 11 year, you want to be striving towards getting a 60+% average. And then I suppose like a place like UCT, for example, they're going to kind of add every percentage and give you a total score out of 600, depending on what degree. Sometimes if you're going for different degrees, it might work slightly different. Place like Stellenbosch is going to work on your average. So just look at the criteria for each of those specific tertiary choices. But as a point of reference here, if you are going to be wanting to pursue something in, for example, engineering, science, we've got to get that maths and science marks above 70%. Of course, medicine works in a slightly different way. And then if you want to pursue something like medicine, they'll add every single percent. If the max score is 600, you will kind of want to be above 530 plus, which equates to about an 87% of the aggregate. But for things like commerce, again, you kind of want a 70% type average. For something like a Bachelor of Accounting degree, they'll look at your maths and they'll say if it's not at 70%, majority of the universities across the country, they won't let you into a degree like that. Interesting though, for your kind of BCom, particularly at your Cape universities, they would generally put a parameter of about 60% as an entrance requirement for their commerce degree. So big kind of nudge for the boys here in grade 11 is that if you're wanting to pursue a business type of degree at a place like Stellenbosch UCT, got to get that maths mark above 60%. And then if you're wanting to pursue things in law, psychology teaching, arts, design, as I said, maths, that's fine, but make sure that the average of your 6 subjects is quite a high level. When I say high level, as example, in a humanities type of degree, to get that, acceptance at a place like UCT, we're almost wanting about a 75% average. For a law degree at the moment at Stellenbosch, it's a selection program, so we need that aggregate to get really high, probably about high 70s, 80s, probably more around the 80 level. Overseas options, again, it's always going to come down to your marks as well. And yes, I said there was a foundation programs that are available in a lot of the courses overseas, but the truth of it is that then you've got to pay an extra year's worth of tuition. If you look at the kind of average cost, let's call it in the UK as an example, you're spending about 800 to $1 million a year. So I suppose for your folks and for you, it's just nice if you don't have to do that. I suppose you don't have to incur the costs of that foundation program. So certainly your marks that you get at the end of this year is imperatively important. It's something that I was kind of trying to look at before I gave you the tertiary suggestions I gave you. So for what it's worth, if you're interested, go and have a look at the entrance requirements for the degrees that I've given you. I may have stretched you slightly from time to time, but the majority of the time I try to hover around what was practical for you from a tertiary perspective. The next kind of component, just to kind of a brief overview around, is your national benchmarking tests. Now, these are national benchmarking tests are kind of standardized tests that are offered in a South African context. They consist of an academic quantitative literacy component called AQL and maths. The AQL is pretty much a 3-hour assessment, multiple choice. When I'm referring to 4 English and 3 maths, it's more math literacy type of questions. The math component, multiple choice, about 60 questions, 3 hours long. And again, there's certain parameters. If you are going to pursue something in that kind of maths and science-based types of degrees, they're going to look at your AQL and your maths. For commerce degrees, it's AQL and maths. And then if you're going to pursue something in humanities, really you only need your AQL when you do your MBTs. And you should be doing those probably mid grade 12. So mid next year, you'll do your MBTs. And the next kind of part of it is we had a look at your SATs, and the truth is there's 1,600 total marks in total. Yeah, this is if you want to go to an option, especially in the States. And for some of the boys, they said, listen, I want to study in the US, but it's quite difficult for me to have given you choices without having a look at these SAT results to see where you benchmarked at. Now, the SAT is administered by the College Board. Again, pretty similar kind of methodology. You've got evidence-based reading and writing. It's kind of similar to your AQL, and then your maths assessment, both out of 800. If you look at your total marks out of 1.6, you kind of want you to be around that 1.250. And I think there's lots of research to suggest that the more hours you put in preparation, you get better results. So you can offer official SAT prep, or you can do official SAT prep through the Khan Academy, and they've got an established program to prep you. You can find it on the College Board website, but I'd really encourage you to do the preparation before kind of doing those SATs. Let me conclude with giving you a couple of key considerations to think about going forward. And the first thing is, obviously, selection is based on the before-mentioned criteria, and in which case, just to summarize, your subject selection, your performance in grade 11 and 12, and then various different benchmarking tests, if those are used. And you've got to just determine, for the UK, they're not going to lose, for example, your SATs or benchmarking assessment, but then your marks are going to be, very important. So it's just important to look at the criteria at each of which country you want to go and study at. But I hope that's given you a bit of a view of those 3 big criteria used. The application window starts in March and September, March to probably September in grade 12, but generally in South Africa, you want to kind of put in those applications as soon as they open, March, April. Place like Pretoria generally opens in March, open in May this year because of COVID. So just monitor, particularly when Pretoria opens. It's one of those universities in the South African context that work almost on a first come, first served basis. So once their programs are full, they close it. So it's the one you've got to be quite conscious of applying as they open. But your UCT, your Stellenbosch open in April, places like Potchefstroom, Rhodes, will all be kind of a March, April kind of window of opening. If you look at the Northern Hemisphere universities, remember their semester will start, or there's tertiary choices or tertiary institutions are going to start in September when you matriculated. So it's important then when we start applying, we're only going to start applying at the end of grade 12, which means I think you can play the system to your benefit, apply for a couple of South African varsities before June. By August, September, you should have a good view generally about what you've been accepted for. And then if you're not kind of happy with those options, you can always pursue overseas options come the end of the year. Remember, for Australia works pretty similar timelines to us, but the majority of people staying up in the northern hemisphere are going to apply at the end of your grade 12 year. Kind of the biggest advice is spread your net quite wide, hedge your bets a little bit inside and South Africa, give yourself options on the table, concrete acceptances before making any decision. Most of the universities have parameters about the amount of degrees that you can apply for, so please take heed of that when you do apply. Understand that if I've given you suggestions, I've worked within those parameters. So I can't give you, for example, 5 choices at UCT. There's only 2. So sometimes we've got to also prioritize, where is our starting point? And generally, you kind of always want to generally put your best choice first. But what's quite nice is that the system, for example, at UCT and Stellenbosch at the moment, is that they'll accept you for all your degree choices, and then you can make up your mind, which is, for my opinion, a great kind of application process. All costs are important. This is really important. I mean, I think, although a lot of the boys are telling me they want to kind of pursue overseas options, and that's great, just have a look at it with your folks. It's a joint decision. And just, I suppose my nudge is to look at the costs required, for each of those options. And for the boys, listen to your folks and what's practical for them. Often they're the ones supporting your study choices. So just have a joint family decision around those. Both private and public options have advantages, disadvantages. You'll see a lot of the boys, for example, I gave private and public. There's some beautiful private options in a South African context. You might want to explore a bit of a combination of either of those 2 choices, but all have their pros and cons. If I've given you private, though, the ones that I've gravitated towards often have a nice level of credibility and a nice historical performance, which is great. And then, again, I mentioned it briefly in the beginning, but I really like to encourage you to not fixate on the end destination. Enjoy the journey. Understand what subjects that you're going to practically do first, second, and third year, and fourth year, if it means that you've got a 4-year degree. For example, I've given quite a few ag degrees as an example, and go and have a look at the substance behind the degree. You might be surprised that it can give you quite a unique journey to get to the outcomes that you might want to pursue. So really, I would encourage you to do some work around your packages of subjects you want to pursue in the degree, or that you will pursue in the degree. Make sure that you identify with those. And if you've got any questions as you go, I'm an email away. Please pop me a note. I'm happy to answer your questions as you go. So just let me know. Great, guys. Thank you so much. I know I've taken quite a bit of your time, but please pop me a mail if you've got any further questions. But just to conclude, it's been an absolute privilege to engage with you, and I look forward to catching up with you at some point or another going forward. Thank you so much.